episode 342 of Global from Asia, and the URL globalfromasia.com/Asia-future. Let's do this. Talking about the future of Asia. Is it the place to be or not?
Welcome to the Global from Asia podcast, where the daunting process of running an international business is broken down into straight-up, actionable advice. And now, your host, Michael Michelini.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for choosing to download and listen and watch or whatever you do. You know, maybe you're reading a transcript of globalfromasia.com/Asia-future. 342 shows every other week. I kind of feel a little bit re-inspired, you know. This whole lockdown's driving me crazy. We can't even get things delivered here from other cities within China. Like, my wife loves buying on these Taobao sites and everything, but delivery people don't even come here. So it's really nuts. So, like, we have to find local delivery now. They at least I'm not doing a COVID test twice a week right now. It's at least let's keep hoping. And just excited to share with you this week's show. We have a great guest. I read his articles. He's got books. He's got lots of resources. He is based in Singapore, Parag Khanna, and he has some really amazing insights. It gets me re-inspired too about being in Asia, being based, doing business, cross-border trade. You know, is this the right place to be? This conversation. So it's obviously a little bit biased, but we talk about, and he talks about reasons why the war for talent, you know, the rising of developing countries in Asia, things like that. It's pretty cool. I learned a few things, and it got me re-inspired. So definitely check out the show. We will go through this in a great way. Also, this was done in audio only, so we will just have the image here. But, you know, hopefully you can enjoy that if you're watching this on YouTube. We'll still put it up there, I think. And after the show, I'll talk a little bit about the mastermind we did this past week, and then we will talk about some of my plans in Asia for the next few years if we ever get out of this lockdown. So without further ado, let's tune into the show. Are you building an Amazon business or a B2B trade business? A lot of people registering in the US right now, and they're not there. They're not Americans. But they're doing it because it's easy, and there's different options, and they're getting their Amazon accounts, but they're having trouble with banking. We have a really high-ranking blog post about getting banks for non-US citizens, and we're really happy to be partnered with Mercury.com. They will be on our next podcast as well, where you can talk to one of the team members there with me. But we also give you a cash bonus on certain conditions, as well as we get a little bit of benefit too at globalfromasia.com/Mercury, or our full review with a video tutorial that I made at globalfromasia.com/reviews/Mercury. Thanks again, Mercury. And if you enjoy the show and want to support, sign up with that link, and I thank you in advance. See you soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Mike Michelini here at the Global from Asia podcast. And the topic today and the guest today is very suitable. Actually, he's recommended by a listener, Parag Khanna. Parag is the leading global strategy advisor, world traveler, and best-selling author. He's the founder and managing partner of Future Map, a data and scenario-based strategic advisory firm. He's also just released one of his newer books, The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. And he's also an author of many other books very relevant to, you know, what's happening in the world, and he's contributed great articles. And it's really a pleasure to have Parag with us on the show today. Thanks for being here.
Great to speak with you, Mike.
Yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, our show name is Global from Asia. We started this in 2013, actually, as an audio podcast, you know, about Hong Kong. Originally, it was purely more around Hong Kong business structure, and then we've grown into cross-border trade and e-commerce from Asia. So I think what you have to, what we discussed today is very relevant to our audience of business owners doing cross-border trade. So, I think the theme of what you've talked about in a lot of your articles and your books is the future is Asia, right? I mean, I think that's what we're about here, and that's what we see, and especially has accelerated. I think the last 1 or 2 years. I think I think a lot was with the trade war and like immigration, right? I think a lot what you're talking about is America was built on immigrants, right? I mean, even I'm an American-born Italian American. I Italian and French, Russian and Canadian, if you believe it. So most Americans are immigrants, but nowadays it seems like walls are going up, right? I mean, that's basically the theme of what's happening.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, in terms of just demographics, leaving aside immigration as such, obviously the
Sure.
present is very Asian, not just the future, because half the world population lives in Asia. And that's the gap between Asia and the rest of the world will only grow because Asia's population continues to grow while you have demographic stagnation in the West. And you actually have a pretty steep drop off in fertility in the Arab world as well. Much of the Arab world, by the way, is in geographic Asia. We can come back to that later. When it comes to immigration, most Asians travel and do business and are tourists and migrate within Asia. But of course, Western societies have benefited massively from Asian immigration. If you take Great Britain, of course, which has a sizable South Asian population, that really ramped up after the independence of India and Pakistan in late 1940s. In the United States, it was the Immigration Act 1965 that opened the door to waves of Chinese and Indian migrants. My family moved to America in 1983 when I was a kid, so I'm myself an immigrant to the United States. And over the last 35 years, I've watched the South Asian population of the United States absolutely balloon. You have roughly 3 million Chinese Americans today, 3 million Indian Americans, and obviously many, many other Asian populations. Of course, you know all the headline stats about the percentage of Silicon Valley that is run by startup founders who are Asian. Of course, the medical profession, pharmaceutical, you name it. So many business sectors really depend on those immigrants. So the question that I've been raising, or that I raised in that book, but it's much more a theme of my future work, is the kind of war for talent. Because we actually have a finite human population and a finite number of livable, desirable places, both politically and economically, socially, environmentally. And the question I've been raising lately is, well, where are those people going to go? Is the flow still from east to west? And what I found, and this is a term that I used in the Asia book, I called it American Asian. So I grew up as an Asian American, and the term American Asian doesn't exist. I coined it, and I coined it because I'm an American who moved back to Asia. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not an Asian American anymore. I'm an American Asian. And what I found here in Singapore and Hong Kong and all across the region, even Indonesia, Vietnam, is throngs of Asian Americans who have never lived in Asia. They were really born and raised in the U.S. like you, and they moved here for the first time because it's become the land of opportunity, because of China's growth, because of innovation across the region, fast-growing markets, all of these reasons of quality of life, adventure, high salaries, whatever the case may be, have lured so many, created a whole new caste of American Asians here in the region. That's something that I do deal with in the book.
Okay. I like that, American Asian. I think that's me, huh? And you. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, my quick story, I think listeners know, I moved here in 2007 to China because of the sourcing from factories and e-commerce, and didn't think I would still be here, but married with kids now, a Chinese wife and 5-year-old and 7-year-old, and still here. But yeah, it's just there's more and more of us for sure. I mean, just like with this show and with what you're doing, and like you said, the opportunity. So, I did want to touch a little bit about the old way. At least I considered it, like you said, the 1940s in UK, 1965 in the US. It's interesting to have those dates. I didn't have the dates before, but yeah, like you said, that used to be East going to West, right? Like Asia moving to America or the UK or the Western world. But I think that they are starting to want to stop that, right? I mean, I talked to a lot of even overseas students, overseas, like we mentioned Silicon Valley, but the policies and, the walls are going up. So I don't know if you want to touch on a little bit of, those are pretty big headlines like you mentioned too, but I don't know if you want to give us some insights of your perspective.
I would say the key words there around walls going up, populism, protectionism, that kind of thing. We in the Anglo-American media, we talk about those things as if they are universal phenomena. Trump and Brexit occurring in the same year. And, again, as if they are global tidal waves. But the fact is, again, the majority of the human population, most countries of the world, most people in the world live in societies that do not look like America and the US, neither in trade policy or in politics. And yes, you have nationalism, but you have also a lot of pragmatism. You have long-term vision that governments are trying to implement. You have more technocratic governance, which is a theme I develop in the book quite a bit when describing Asian political systems, because they may be democratic or they may be authoritarian. In fact, more people in Asia live in democratic countries than authoritarian ones. And I think that's very important, obviously, for people in the West to understand that when you look at Asia, you shouldn't just see China.
Yes.
There are 1.4 billion people who live under a Chinese authoritarian system, and there's a couple of other authoritarian countries in the region, but the majority of Asians live in democratic countries, whether it's India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and so on and so forth. So let's remember that while there's great diversity of politics in Asia, the majority is democratic, and people prefer democracy, but they also want to see, again, strong, far-sighted, utilitarian kinds of leaders that are sort of technocratic, as I say, with real competence and experience in governance. And if they don't see those kinds of leaders, then they'll throw them out. And that's very important as well. And I think there's a lot, obviously, to be learned from the technocratic idea from the West. It is, of course, a Western concept entirely. Whether you're talking about Plato's notion of the guardians or the constitution of the French political system in the late 19th century, technocracy is basically a Western idea. You could say, obviously, it's a Chinese idea as well, if you think about the ancient Confucian Mandarin system for public officials. So, it's actually kind of a sensible global framework in which to look at things. But just getting back to your point around politics. So, when we say walls are going up and protectionism and borders and so forth, well, obviously that's not true of the largest region of the entire world, because here they just ratified the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the largest trade zone on the planet. So again, we have to remember that we don't live in one world by which, kind of American and British politics dictate the system to the rest. It's really being flipped on its head. And I started making that case, about 15 years ago in my very first book. But this book is kind of the time, the sort of pulling all of those threads together.
Exciting times. Yeah, so let's focus on like the future. That's what you're working on now, and you're talking about the future is Asia. I'll be honest, I literally just had a phone call with a friend yesterday just saying I should go back to the US. Things are getting a little bit crazy here. It's safer there. I don't know. A lot of my friends seem to think that, but I don't want to get too personal, but I'll just say Asia. I won't say maybe mainland China or not, but I might have more outside China plans. But, I plan to stay in Asia. That's why the show is called Global from Asia. I think you and I are a similar wavelength with the opportunities here. So, and I like the point you just brought up about a lot of people, and, I kind of joke about myself being kind of like one of these typical Americans. Before I came here, I thought everything was China. I didn't really understand the differences. Even, of course, I knew India was different, but I think a lot of times Americans don't realize, like you just pointed out, that Asia is much more than China, and there's a lot of democracies there that have different systems. So and I like that point you just brought up about the opening up in the largest trade zones. So you're thinking a lot of people from the US or the Western world will move here too, or is the theory more that Asia will just continue to develop independently, organically?
No, it's both. As I said, there's not only the sort of American Asians, there's Europeans, there's Africans, Arabs. There is a gravitational pull. And again, one of the big things is just circulation of people. Just during this pandemic, it's both quality and quantity. During this pandemic, I've witnessed now nearly a dozen high net worth, tech sector Americans move here with their assets, their families, and so forth, straight into Singapore. So those are high quality people. And again, it goes back to this war for talent is, China has not only lured back hundreds of thousands of so-called sea turtles. India had been doing the same and is trying to continue to do that. This sort of city states like Singapore, as I just described. Japan is becoming, a popular place for expats. There's never been 3 million non-Japanese people living in Japan, but that's exactly the case today. And many of, they come from all over the world. So I do think that Asia is a talent magnet. Again, many countries offer a superior quality of life. And, it's a place to start new things. And obviously the markets are enormous and growing. And I think there's just many, many factors. So there's a traditional model where expats are sent here and they stay for a couple of years and they're pulled back. What I see today is very different. It's individuals voluntarily coming here as entrepreneurs, not being sent here by multinational employers in the West. And that's a very, very different model. And they're here for the long haul. They're taking permanent residency. They're settling down. They're investing. They're raising their families here. And it's a far larger number of Westerners doing that today than in the 70s and 80s.
I would agree. I mean, I'm one of them. And I do talk to quite a few people. I think one of the hurdles, I'm not sure if you have any insights for parents, but you mentioned also families. I think that is one of the bigger challenges. A lot of times the traditional expat would leave, or they would have the big packages, so their big corporate companies would pay for their kids' school, But I think school is one of the bigger challenges, I think, for foreigners in any country. I would imagine going either east to west or west to east. But I hope there's more programs for immigrants, to Asia for education. That's been one of the bigger challenges that myself and others I've talked to.
This is an interesting shift, actually, because now you do have those Western campuses that have opened up here. So Yale and US is one example, but there's many, many others, affiliated campuses of Western universities, even just Asian universities that are growing in stature. I get emails from people in Europe, young students in Europe saying, I really want to do my master's degree at XYZ institution in Asia. Can you help me with that? One of the first times I started kind of tracking this theme was when I went to lecture at Tsinghua in Beijing in their master's program of international relations. And I was expecting to see an audience of all Chinese students, but they had just launched their English language master's degree. So it was a very kind of, diverse audience in the auditorium. And I was like, wow, these are American or European kids who could have done their master's degree at SIPA, at Columbia, or Georgetown, in the MSFS, or Johns Hopkins SAIS, or the Harvard Kennedy School, or Princeton Woodrow Wilson School, but instead they came to do their master's in Beijing. And that was really a kind of eye-opening thing. And that was, again, about 14 years ago, right? Now, obviously, when it comes to China, there's been a lot of volatility in the foreign student population because of COVID and, political sensitivities and so on. But I'll actually, as a reminder, this is someone I quoted, actually a sort of a university official in China who I spoke to recently. He said that, the numbers of Americans are, of course, down, right, recently, other than, perhaps elite programs like Schwarzman Scholars or whatever. But he said, the number of students from BRI countries is way up, right? And as you and I know, that stands for Belt and Road Initiative, talking about, dozens and dozens of countries across maybe mostly the rest of Asia, the developing world. But the number of overall foreign students in China is strong because they're coming from the rest of the world. So the fate of Asian or Chinese higher education does not depend on whether they attract curious, backpacking Americans or even young American scholars. It is about training the next generation of leaders, wherever they may come from around the world, and the countries with which Asian nations have strong or growing relationships.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, as an American in China, I get these warnings from the embassy like weekly nowadays, and it is pretty nerve-wracking. I joined a webinar with the U.S. Embassy about Americans in China. I think it was around Christmas. It was a Christmas party. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely unstable times for sure these last couple of years, and we'll see what the new policies in the West, in America, do for the future. But yeah, I would agree. It's definitely more like BRI, Belt Road Initiative, or non-US people are moving to Asia or China. It's pretty fascinating, though, the all English language master's program in Beijing. I've seen others go there for Chinese language or immersion program, but that's pretty insightful. I wasn't aware of that, but yeah, I mean, I do think that there's been this shift of Asia countries learning that Westerners or foreigners want to live in their country long term. I think, Thailand's another hotspot of, digital nomads or, entrepreneurs that want to spend time there. And I think they're working on longer term visa programs for these kind of digital entrepreneurs. What kind of immigration tips or insights or information would you like to share with us, for people looking to make this move and follow this new trend?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think this is pre-COVID. The pre-COVID period featured, governments being more confident in wanting to attract foreign investors, right? So as their passports became more globally viable, as their expat communities grew, as they searched for entrepreneurs and talent and investors, many countries, again, Thailand, Indonesia, many have streamlined immigration, right? But not only to harmonize regulations amongst themselves, because that's been called for in the Asian integration process, but also obviously again to recruit global talent. So Singapore, everyone, Japan has made it easier to buy property. All of these things have been underway. Then with COVID, obviously you now have this kind of, a bump, if you will. You've been reading about this in the news headlines every day. Another country announces some kind of a global nomad visa, come, no questions asked, stay as long as you like, entrepreneur visa, tech pass in Singapore. Those are two examples. So these things are flourishing, and obviously people should just pick their country, look up the program and apply online, or arbitrage among them and see who gives you the best deal. It's going to be low tax. It's going to be, again, affordable living. It's going to be high quality of life. It's going to be sort of come and go as you please, no fixed commitment. They're probably reducing the amount of capital up front that you have to invest, if any, for an initial 1 or 2 year period. Because again, this is a broader kind of macroeconomic, or public policy point, but one that I've kind of been not preaching, but observing for a long time, which is that smart countries don't really chase tax revenue. They chase investment, right? Investment is sticky. Tax revenue is fleeting. It comes in, goes out. But investment, people planting their roots in a country, investing in property, putting their kids in schools, eating in restaurants, that kind of thing, is more important. Obviously, in having companies, no doubt, relocate their headquarters, move their manpower, build factories and labs. That's what smart countries do, right? They're going after investment. And that's what you see happening across Asia, because only the wealthiest Asian countries have very high tax rates, by which I mean sort of Japan and Korea. But obviously smaller Asian countries have far lower tax rates. Even wealthy ones like Singapore, Malaysia is relatively modest as well. So at this point, there's just the Pandora's box is open in terms of the various schemes by which one can move to some Asian country or the other. And I've been watching this now for a decade, and I see people going to many different countries for many different reasons, right? You could be going to Australia if you are trying to, hide your money from China or from the Korean or Japanese tax authorities, right? You could be choosing Bali, right? As you know, Bali and Phuket are growing as long-term residential enclaves and hubs. But again, even before COVID, because the cost of living in those places is much lower than Singapore or Hong Kong, I've known executives to relocate, dozens and dozens of workers to those places. And what young software programmer or e-commerce manager is going to complain about being forcefully moved to Bali to do their work remotely? No one, right? So this has been going on for a while. You and I are both parents, so we also look at the international schools. Yep. Places that never had international schools now have full-fledged international schools. Well, it's not for the locals, right? It's for the growing number of expats. So again, take your pick of country, of city, of province, if you prefer city or beach or whatever. And, you can probably pretty much go and move there.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, one thing we're thinking about doing is, it's so early, I don't think maybe this is the first time we'll even have said it on our show, is we're thinking about having a little bit of like a community, somewhat a physical community, where we invite people in our community to live in that neighborhood, and we can hopefully support each other. I mean, I think after all this COVID lockdown, I think a lot of us want to live in vicinity so that we could see other, people in our kind of like our tribes. It's like these village kind of thoughts, as others I've talked to too. They want to kind of have these hubs of people really close to each other, just for the social and the human part of living. So we're looking at putting something like that together, probably be over a year or so away, and step by step. But that's one thing we're playing with as a community.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's talk about your books. You have quite a few, and I mentioned one in your bio, and you have things you're working on. Do you want to share a little bit about those?
Well, sort of past, present, or future?
I think maybe the current book is The Future is Asian, the commerce, conflict, and culture in the 21st century.
Right. So, that one came out last year, but, again, some of the central arguments around Asia's economic recovery leading the world after COVID are now baked into kind of how we think about where the world economy is going. So, it's as relevant as ever. The Asian sort of technocracy model, obviously, as well, looking at which governments perform the best in coping with COVID. Obviously, that thesis is validated, and so I've been kind of, advocating, not that, as I said before, yes, the rest of the world can learn. It's not that one model is better than another. The central thesis is very much that Asia is a new layer of paint on a canvas. And that canvas already has European and American layers on it. And when you paint another layer on a canvas, you don't wipe out the previous colors, right? The colors blend together. And that's really what's happening in the world today. And obviously, it's not a short-term argument. So COVID only accelerates and strengthens the argument, but we're talking about a decades-long process. Every region of the world, as it rises, has its sort of moment in the sun where the stars align, where you have young populations, you have industrialization, public investment, you have innovation and, education strengthening and political stability and geopolitical stability. All these stars have been aligning for the past, say, 40 plus years in Asia, and they're going to continue to. It's not going to stop tomorrow, right? It's obviously not going to stop because of COVID. It quite frankly, and this is where the book is very geopolitical, it's not going to stop even if there's a war, right? You could have war over Taiwan, war in North Korea, you could have a war in the South China Sea, war between India and China. Every major World War III scenario in the world is in Asia, right? So I'm hardly in denial about it. I spend a lot of my time sort of studying each of those scenarios and worrying about them. However, Asia is not Europe, right? It's not like Europe in 1914 where you have a conflict in one place and there's chain reactions and escalation and the whole continent is engulfed in war. Asia is a hell of a lot bigger than Europe, and it's much more diverse. And these conflicts are somewhat dissociated from each other. They're bilateral and they're localized. So if and when you have such a sort of escalation or something sort of blows over, eventually you may have a conflict and you'll have a winner and you'll have a loser. You'll have a settlement and things will move on, right? And that's kind of how history works. So there are a lot of people who say, look, the Asian story seems great, but what happens when you have a war? And my answer is, so what? Right? I don't literally mean to be flippant, but I mean, you tell me if you believe that the entire Asian story of 5 billion people and infrastructure investment and trade and urbanization and technology and empowerment, are you telling me that North-South Korean conflict derails the story of every other society in Asia? Because you have to make that case, right? I don't have to make that case. You need to prove that you think that there is a particular scenario, even Taiwan, again, God forbid in each of these scenarios, but you tell me how it destroys all of Asia. It doesn't. And the sad truth of kind of global history is that, you wouldn't have the European Union today if you hadn't had the horrors of World War I and World War II. Right? But, unfortunately, in Europe's case, you had to have the devastating conflicts and destruction and loss of population and life in order to eventually have an evolution towards the European Union. Now, in Asia, there isn't going to be an Asian Union, but you can, hopefully find ways, and this is what I call technocratic peace theory instead of democratic peace theory, which is kind of an axiom of Western political science. In technocratic peace theory, the Asian leaders know exactly where to draw the lines on the map in order to solve conflicts, right? They just can't do so publicly in a time when their grip on power may be considered fragile, or they may be considered to be weak or appeasing if they make concessions that are above and beyond what the other side makes. So my approach is that there should be a technocratic peace in which you have basically secret deliberations among countries with independent panels with participation of represented or kind of stakeholder countries. And they come to these agreements, quietly, without the results of the agreements, sort of feeding back to the head of state such that they are the ones held responsible for the outcome. So you could, for example, have a 5-year process that a leader initiates saying, over the next 5 years, we're going to settle this conflict diplomatically. I may not be the one in charge of this country 5 years from now, but I'm initiating the process. 5 years later, the person who is the leader, when those processes are complete, is not going to be the one held responsible for the outcome, but you will have a politically a peaceful settlement of disputes. So this is the kind of approach that I would take. It may seem like it's just some kind of academic game, but actually this is how a number of conflicts or island disputes and so forth have been settled in the past. And I definitely think it's much more appropriate for the Asian context.
Well, this has really been insightful. Thank you. Thank you for these insights. And then you have a book coming, right? You want to share about what's coming, how people could find out more?
Yeah, a brief teaser. It's called Move, and it's about the future of human geography. So I'm really looking at the species level, reorganization of human civilization in light of a climate change, in light of political disruptions, economic crises, technological automation, and focused in particular on the next 30 years, which means I'm looking at young people, because young people, those under the age of 40, represent about 55 to 60% of the human population. Now, old people tend to not move as much as young people. And so if you want to understand the future demographics and population distribution of the world, you obviously need to focus on what young people are doing. People like you, me, what we do with our children, what our children do, and so on. So I decided to look kind of from a bottom-up view at where young people are moving and why they're moving and what motivates them and what countries are doing the best job of absorbing youth. And this is a fundamentally economic and therefore also geopolitical a line of research, because it's not really just about, demographics and preferences and psychology. Fundamentally, a strong country is one that's absorbing people, right? No one thinks of Russia as a superpower precisely because its demographics have collapsed. So, Canada, meanwhile, is actively planning to triple its population to reach 75 or 100 million people in the coming decades. So the geopolitics of 50 years from now looks very different in light of climate change and migration. So I decided to take this bottom-up, kind of human-centric view and let that story unfold to make some scenarios and forecasts around what the future economic and geopolitical landscape looks like on the basis of the necessity of mass migrations in light of all of the disturbances and disruptions today. So that's that book, Move, and it's coming out in September of this year.
Well, exciting. And then the best place, I think where people can find you is your personal site, Parag Khanna, which we'll share in the show notes and link to the various things you've mentioned. And then FutureMap is your agency, futuremap.io.
FutureMap is my consulting firm, my advisory firm. So we're about 8 partners. And we do a lot of work with governments and companies on their either building scenarios or doing kind of global strategies for them.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I think that I know you're so busy. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. And it's exciting times, I think, for you're positioned and where we are in the community here and listeners. So if you're listening to this, I hope I hope you got some insights and took some action. And it seems like, I think at least I believe, and Parag is saying, is Asia seems like the future. I mean, that's where the talent people are coming here. There's the huge populations. The trend is still here, and it seems like it's accelerated even more post COVID, for sure, right?
No question. I mean, I was going to call the book, as a joke, I say the book could have been called "The Present is Asian," because the present already is Asian. But yeah, I think, again, for better or worse, the thesis certainly feels like it's being validated. And it's interesting to hear you saying that, irrespective of what's happening in Hong Kong, you certainly plan to stay in the region. I think that's also proof of the argument.
Yeah. Although Southeast Asia is pulling me a little bit more than.
Well, you're more than welcome down here.
Yeah, coming soon. All right. Thanks again, Parag, and let's stay in touch. Thanks again for sharing with it.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to speak with you.
That was cool. Thank you so much, Parag. I really appreciate him coming on and sharing with us and inspiring us. I think Asia's still the place to be. I remember when I was evacuating Philippines to China, and I got U.S. Embassy emailing me that if I don't go back to the U.S., or I was reading some kind of tweets from the State Department, state.gov, something in the U.S., and if they said, "Dear U.S. citizens, if you don't return to America soon, there might not be an opportunity to come back for an I don't know if the exact word, extended amount of time." And I'm like, well, this is my home. My wife is here. My kids are here. My work is here. Buying from a Thailand factory, partnering with a Thailand factory, selling on Amazon, new brand. Here in China, I just had an amazing consultation session with a Chengdu Amazon selling company. And but this is where I plan to be. That's why I named the show Global from Asia, obviously. I luckily didn't call it Global from China, although I keep coming back to China. But a little bit about my plans, like I said in the intro, still trying to get back to Thailand. I know some people tempt me about Vietnam or tempt me about, Malaysia. But my wife bought a car, okay? So we got a car stuck there, and you can't even sell the car if you don't have a long-term visa. And even then, if you have it, it's hard to do it if you're not there. So I don't want to say because we have a car we're going back, but partnering with a factory to do a new Amazon brand, selling factory direct on Amazon, and that's been moving forward. We'll talk about that in next show, the banking solution that we use, Mercury, and the experiences there. But, I just always like the energy here, and I have an amazing team, mostly in the Philippines. They're helping make these amazing shows, and we are doing a lot of hard work here to build a long-term future. My kids are learning Chinese and English, or at least I'm their English teacher. But that's the long-term plan. So, and I'm enjoying these masterminds. We have the masterminds for Global from Asia VIP members, and I want to show a little clip of that. We'll add that into the end of this video. We also have independent parts of that, but I want to show some highlights of what we learned and what we did in the last mastermind, which is members only. And I hope you are interested to join us for future ones. So I think that's it for this week's show. I will see you in the next one. We already recorded it. It's going to be in 2 weeks' time with online banking US without having to go there, without having to have a U.S. citizenship. So, and some strategies and sites and other options for you. So I'm really excited to do that one with you next week. Until next time, thank you so much. If you're in a membership, see you at the mastermind. If not, see you on the podcast in 2 weeks. Now let's do a recap of this past week's mastermind session. Take care. All right, so just wrapped up 1 hour session here. January 19, 2020. We had a nice group. We put together the FBA and dropshippers into one table today, and what we discussed was some inventory financing, some options for people based in Asia, not in the US, some companies that I know and others have used or talked about, and then we kind of went into some ways to start. We were talking about different ways of choosing your product and how many products to launch with, how to test, how much money to invest in which product. I was getting some tips from others, and then we wrapped it up where each person said what they're going to work on until the next 2 weeks from now. So we got some people kind of trying different markets, trying new products, trying some new tactics, And in 2 weeks, we'll see how they've grown. This is what it's all about. It's what we're trying to do here at the GFA VIP Mastermind, our membership at Global from Asia. It'd be great to see some people in here join us. So globalfromasia.com/apply, application only. Let us know what you're interested in, and hope to see you on the next one. Take care.
To get more info about running an international business, please visit our website at www.globalfromasia.com. That's www.globalfromasia.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to our iTunes feed. Thanks for tuning in.